What will be the role of fuel cells in transportations? There seems to be a heated debate on whether batteries or hydrogen fuel cells are the solution for the future. I am of the opinion that there is not a unique solution to replace all the gasoline engines and diesel engines. Batteries and hydrogen fuel cells have their own strengths and limitations, and they can be more suitable for different purposes. But let's talk a bit about pros and cons of hydrogen fuel cells for transportation. The technology that is proposed generally for transportation is PEM fuel cells. This fuel cell technology has a very high energy density compared to batteries. So that's the first advantage. The need to handle corrosive acids or materials that are hard to dispose or recycle is also avoided. Components in PEM fuel cells are less problematic to recycle than batteries. And another significant advantage is the charging time. Fueling a hydrogen car, it looks exactly like fueling your gasoline car. It's a matter of minutes. Now, while it can make totally sense to use battery vehicles in the city, where anyway we have to keep our car parked maybe for hours so we can charge it in the meantime, there are applications like for long-haul transportation or for construction equipment where hydrogen can be much more convenient because continuous operation and fast charging are critical for the profits. But there are challenges, of course. What is important to mention with PEM is that the polymeric membrane that enables the reaction has to be humidified with a specific water amount. So the water amount in the fuel cell has to be kept at an optimal level. Too low and the membrane will dry, and too high and the cell will flood, and in both cases the reaction will stop. As the reactions inside the cell produce water at different rates depending on the power demand, you can see that this is not always a simple task. So water management can be complex, maybe not so much for city cars, but in other applications like for construction equipment, for airplanes, where the demand from the fuel cell is not exactly the same as what we expect in a city car, then water management can be a challenge. Another challenge is hydrogen storage. Now, hydrogen is very light, although its energy density is really high per unit of mass, but its volumetric energy density is very low. That's because to store 1 kilogram of hydrogen at atmospheric pressure, we require a huge volume. So for practical purposes, we need to store hydrogen either in compressed form or in liquefied form. Now for transportation, we are talking about compressing hydrogen at 700 bar. So storing hydrogen in a compressed form. This is the maximum practical pressure to store hydrogen in this way. Compressing hydrogen at 700 bar requires a huge amount of energy. Essentially, half of the energy is lost when we store hydrogen in this way. Liquefying hydrogen requires even more energy, and also it requires to keep the storage at an incredibly low temperature to avoid hydrogen boil-off. But the advantage is that we can store much more energy in the same space. So while this is not a practical solution for in our cars, it can be an interesting solution for airplanes, for example. But since storing hydrogen requires so much energy that we basically just lose, of course, then the question can be, why don't we just store energy in batteries instead? That could be, that seems to be the answer to all this debate. But there is one advantage in storing energy in hydrogen over storing electrical energy in the batteries, and that is for how long you can store it. So energy in the hydrogen can be stored for really for much longer time than in batteries. So for long-term storage, hydrogen is much more convenient. There is also a way to store hydrogen in solid metal hydrates. These metal hydrates can be stored at ambient temperature and pressure, so it makes it an ideal solution for the long-term storage. But it requires high temperature, above 300 degrees Celsius, to extract the hydrogen back from the metal hydrate. So again, it's also not a viable solution for our cars, but it can be a viable solution for other applications, of course. So this is not meant to be in any way the whole story or the whole picture in this debate about hydrogen and battery cars, but I hope I gave you a little bit of food for thoughts. Of course, now figuring out what is the optimal balance between battery cars and battery vehicles and fuel cell vehicles, or even other type of sustainable fuels, now that's a question that needs to be addressed.